All right. Good afternoon, everyone. I am prepared to welcome everyone. Rather than go around, I'll ask you to invite your summer associates, talk a little bit about that experience that they have. But I will, I introduce myself, and I'm the chair of the ADA board. And you do the roll call for Tracy.
Chairwoman Weber-Cloud. Mr. Andre is excused. Councilor Huddy.
Here.
Ms. Crawford is excused. Mayor Giantino is also excused. Ms. Leone is also here. Mr. Lovell.
I'm here.
Ms. Walter. Ms. Hennigan.
Present. Great. Good. If we could quickly, just for our guests, if they're going to go around the room and introduce yourself, just your name, your affiliation, with data, however you want to talk about it, and then we go ahead and have you introduce yourself. Start, Mr. Wall.
I'm Carrie. I'm a teacher at the local BOCES, and I'm serving as Smaller City Council.
I'm Courtney Hagan, and I work for Hugh County with Department.
I'm Karen, and I'm a retired civil servant, but I'm a very interested citizen. So I've been very about the data, they're attending meetings for now, it's another report.
The best note taker in the land.
And our resident historian, yeah, notes from there. Tracy, would you introduce yourself, and then I'll let Rob set the stage, and we're going to introduce these attorneys in the making.
So I'm Tracy Barrier. I am the interim executive director for the Auburn IDA. So I'm serving in the capacity of the management at the time being, but I work for MRD Group, which is consulting with Rochester. But I live right there.
To within walking distance.
Yes.
And Rob, would you just talk a little bit about your summer associates program?
Yeah, sure.
I wanted to invite
So-
these attorneys on the way here.
Right, so these are second year law students, or they just finished their second year. Who come to us from, are you guys all from Syracuse? They're all from Syracuse University, and they applied to our position. They're gonna be coming to observe being a lawyer, participate in being a lawyer to the extent that they're allowed to under the ethical rules. We're also trying to sell our stuff to them so that they'll come back, after the third year of law school and become full-time associates. So I don't know what other field trips they've had so far. This might be the first one.
For the record, it'll be the best one too. Okay, tell us, sir, how strong.
So, yeah.
Would you introduce yourselves to all of us as well? And get into some business over
Yeah, hi, my name is Greg Patrick.
I'm CRV, thanks for having us.
I'm Carly Castillo. Thank you again for having us.
Great. So I'm sure Rob kind of gave you the highlights of what we do. So welcome, and we're just going to work through our regular business agenda, okay? And you've got a mentor in front of you, so send them a note if you're like, what are you doing? Great. So Tracy, the first thing on the agenda is everyone have an opportunity to review the minutes from our last week. Any questions, comments, concerns? If not, I'll entertain a motion to accept the minutes. All those in favor? We did? All right, great. All right, Tracy, would you like to start walking us through the new business items?
Yeah, so as we talked about at our last meeting, our audit was completed by the Office of the State Comptroller. Under that audit, we do need to create a corrective action plan for a few primarily monitoring issues, and making some changes to our application to collect additional information in our applications. So I drafted and included in your packet a draft of the correction action plan. And what I would recommend doing is, we can discuss anything that hops out to you today, but what I would recommend doing is having an audit committee meeting to dig into anything specific within the corrective action plan, have the audit committee make a recommendation to the full board, and then our next meeting approve the corrective action plan for submission. And the submission is going to be due in July, so July 24th. specifically, is our deadline to get this submitted. So, at our June, if we approve it at our June meeting, we'll be in good shape to get that done. But I wanted to put a draft in front of you all in case there's anything that pops out, so we don't frown. It's, it's not on that computer.
Okay.
Oh, it's on my.
It's okay, I sent them the.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Do all of you have a chance to take a look at the corrective action plan? So do you have any questions, need any clarification from Tracy about what we're telling them we will correct?
And so one thing, actually, Rob, if you have advice, I did combine a couple of their recommendations because we're taking certain actions that apply to both of their recommendations. And I don't know if they'll like that or not, so if I need to separate those, I don't know if you have any thoughts on experience, but basically, audit recommendation 1 was about supporting documentation of capital investments and current jobs within the applications. They wanted to see us having verification of their budgets, of project budgets, via some form of quotes or estimates. This is getting harder and harder to do, but we can try. And then also, we do request NY45s in our annual monitor, but we haven't been requesting it as part of the application process to verify their current jobs.
Okay.
So that basically, they recommended that we start collecting those NY45s with the application as well, so that we can verify that they have the job that they have from the start. So I've actually already added that to our application. So I've already added a space, or in the list of documents that we want, or we're requesting, I've added bullets for cost estimates and job verification. So that I've already done.
I'm surprised that wasn't the thing that we did. I mean, that was, we thought of earlier.
Yeah, yeah, that was kind of one of the things. That NY45s at time of application, I was like, huh, yeah, that would make sense. But you don't know what you don't know. And then 2 and 4 were around.
Tracy's.
Yes.
Did they add any color to them? And I can't remember. But project costs, quotes and estimates, I mean. With price fluctuations now, it's just really hard, getting harder and harder to estimate the project.
Yes, this, I think their main, so the flavor of, in our exit interviews, when we were talking about this, it was really about saying like, okay, you say you have a $20 million project, show us you have a $20 million project. Because A, we base our fee off of what you're telling us your project budget is. And B, you know, we want to make sure that if we're incentivizing a 20 million project, we're getting a 20 million. So it was really more of just finding a way to ensure that a $20 million project is that, not a $9 million project. I don't think the intent is for us to like be auditing quotes and estimates. I think it's just more to verify the information in the application. But yeah, costs are changing rapidly.
Well, I mean, with what's going on in Washington, it could be bid at 20 million, and the next week it's 15% higher.
Yeah.
You know, the lumber cost. Yeah.
Right, so I think it's really just more about how they came to the figures in the application. As opposed to saying like, okay, well, this is exactly how much money you're gonna spend. So. It's more for the board's consideration and the board's oversight as opposed to. Holding.
Any other questions, comments, concerns?
No, I just had a question on NY45s. It's in the Google either some of our states to get those, or might be able to get those. Are we able to access those records through either tax and finance or through I think it will be the agency, correct?
We actually have to collect those from the firms themselves. I imagine if we were gonna get them from the state agency, we would defer them and we know how long it's gonna take to get, so I don't think it would be helpful. We actually let them directly from the project owner. The problem with NY45s is less of a reluctance and more of it's project dependent, so some of our projects are relying on tenants for the job creation. And that's a different, because the tenants didn't sign on to the aided bill. We can't really, it gets a little trickier where we're trying to confirm jobs that are not directly employed by the project owner. So like we've got Plaza of the Arts. There's not really an NY45 we can ask for except for that project owner themselves. So we need to think about other ways to verify the jobs that are with their tenants. We can ask them to ask for NY45s, but again, we're starting to get into a little bit of gray area because those tenants didn't agree to the terms of that. So that's where we start, and like even like Caravale, they have multiple locations in New York State. So their NY45 includes jobs from other sites as well. So it's a little bit harder to rely on that NY45 to verify their Auburn jobs. So we have to also, like we've been getting a payroll register from them as well. So it's less of a reluctance and more of a, sometimes NY45s don't give you the information.
I'm just thinking in terms of, I told that said that it must be a government agency that.
You're assuming that the government agencies talk to each other.
No, I understand. Yeah, I understand totally well. Yeah, I know government. Yeah.
And I think, so again, the OSC, they don't actually say that you have to get NY45s. They say that they want you to verify the jobs. NY45s is often the easiest way to do that because it is a state one, it's already certified into the state what your jobs are. So it's just in cases where the NY45 doesn't give us what we need to get a little more creative in our monitoring. Because we go on site and we say, like, does it look like 100 people work here? Yeah, it looks like 100 people work here, and they like that too. So does the OSC require NY45s now, or is it just a recommendation? The requirement, I think it's just.
There was a requirement, I think, the post receipt of benefits. It's not in the application. So, yeah, I assume you can get them from DOL, but yeah, you have to foil them. There's no way to just post that on a database.
Because like their social security numbers, we actually have them redact. Like,
Yeah.
or we just collect the coverage sheets, which don't have any identifying information, but sometimes they'll send us their whole thing on 45 with all their employees' social security numbers. And I'm like, oh, please don't do that. I don't want them. Take them back. So yeah, it's not a document that we can just like go on and search. But it would be great if OSC would just go to DOL and say, hey, can I have the coverage sheets for these
Yeah.
projects? For what it's worth.
It's the response. To get what you needed here? Yes, thank you.
I'd like to introduce Tess Hopper, she's Ada. And Rob has brought some summer associates and aspiring law students with him to just observe the work.
That's awesome.
Tessa keeps her mind off her money and her money off her money. Just get up there, so I can birthday, right? Great, so,
These are kids.
yeah, they know. Tracy, is there anything else or any of you related to what we're proposing as, what will be that as the corrective action?
Question, so we're just talking about the corrective action plan draft, to get an initial feedback from the board, some of the audit committee, and then, because that's what it was. And, then, but I know you've been thinking about a lot, so. Open it and thoughts you have.
Oh, I read, so being through the process, and then I'm sorry, I walked in on your question, which I think I got the gist of your question, which is a very good question. So overall, I think as far as corrective action plan, I thought that, what was drafted, a lot of it we're not doing, so.
Although I haven't started to get those other monitoring visits scheduled.
So I just want to offer something quickly, and we don't need to spend a lot of time on this, but the outcomes of this audit were quite the story. In our local newspaper, I shared with you all the links and how I opted to respond to all of those things. What it did for Tracy and I, though, was to spark some conversation about how we keep our local media apprised about the work that we're doing. Because the reality is, when I spoke with the reporter, he basically just went on the website and drew down the report and then did a whole story about it. And I was like, did it occur to you that maybe you want to talk to me? So anyway, he did after the fact. But because of that, because pretty much everything we do is public, Tracy and I are also talking about what are some things we can do to get ahead of the meeting. So we will stay on touch with this. Robert will probably be watching pretty much our moves from here on out. But, it was one of those situations that just made me more mindful that we need to have some communication strategies in place and that we need to build, a relationship with our government reporter anyway, just so that he understands what we're doing and how we're doing it. Because that story in the void of a response had us looking a bit, crazy out there. And it was great to be able to say that we weren't surprised by any of the findings, that we were already actually starting to act on some of those things. We informed the auditors that they would find this. I talked to him about why he was really open to that. So we just need to be prepared to read about ourselves in the paper. And as things come up, I'll notify you in the same way that I did. And when I have time, I'll always sort of send talking points out to you, like, this is what I'm going to say ahead of time. That just happened so quickly that I talked to the mayor, talked to the Jim and Tracy, and decided I would just reach out and give them a call. So if you have any feedback about that, about how that thing about the meeting, it's fine. I'm always open to feedback. But I wanted to just really ask Tracy and I thinking about how do we get ahead of reporters who are going to be interested in ADA. And I believe that part of the interest in ADA is that there's so much dynamic stuff happening in our local economic development environment anyway. So they're keeping eyes on what the county's doing, what we're doing, the city's doing. So we just need to be mindful. Yes, did you have something?
Yes, so after that, is there an option? Didn't they used to do like certain columns, like some people can do that? Does that cost money, or is that something that like
No,
somebody just, like one of us just assigns that?
you gotta offer to do it.
And, because I think about that too,
Right.
even, just like in my position, they'll like, you just put something in the newspaper and it's like, they're just taking it off of what they see.
Right.
There's usually a way to explain it a little bit better. So is that typical though? Like, or can we change that? I guess what was the result of the conversation and how to stay ahead of it?
Say that again.
What was the finding, how to stay ahead of it?
To get the citizen to,
Yeah.
I don't think they will, because they're in the business
Okay, that's
of this, right? But I do think that we can, now that we understand that they're paying attention to what's happening with economic development in the county, we can be more proactive about building a relationship with him. I said to him, as you're reading things about Ada, I'd like you to contact me or the mayor or the city manager ahead of you printing something, because that story was pretty much printed with no context. And he was open to that feedback. But Tracy and I also talked about just some things that we can do. Like, I think there was a time when our managing entity was CETA, there was a regular column in the newspaper. So we have the opportunities to provide updates. Tracy and I talked about ways to do that for the general public as well as with our internal and external stakeholders. So we're just letting people know what we're doing in advance, and it's really about building relationship. Their job is to get the story, and our job is to make sure that they tell the story from our perspective with the truth. He knows me, so he knows I'm really transparent. There's nothing ever to hide. And I just think we have to manage on it. Does that make sense, Tessa? And there are ways we can do an op-ed if we wanted to. We can have a column, and then Tracy was thinking about some other ways for us just to elevate our presence in what we're doing in the community as well.
Okay,
Does
that's
that make
great.
sense?
Yeah, I was just more concerned, like, how, like, if they charge you to do those things
No.
and like.
No, but I'll say, that article that ran, really your response to them. I wouldn't have run that as a newspaper editor, but as a newspaper editor for a long time. It's not an article.
Yeah.
But articles like that talking to the target.
That was my initial thought, but.
Mine too.
To like get a in-depth, like have substance to the story.
Yeah. Well, I think the other thing,
Yeah, just in hindsight, like, I or Glenn or someone could have reached out in advance and said, hey, this is gonna drop. Like, call us, like, let's set up a time to talk before you write an article, or like, coming up, we're talking about amending our UTEP. Like, we should reach out and say, we're amending our UTEP, this is what's in it, this is the public hearing, you know, and having that conversation in advance so that we're being very transparent about this is what we're doing, this is why we're doing it. And we're telling them our story without them just seeing it in our meeting packet, you know, or like trying to like read into our UTEP without any context, you know, being proactive in those kinds of ways. Or like when we have a project, you know, that packet goes out with a project application, we can proactively reach out and say, what questions do you have about this project? You know,
and I just want to formalize it, right? So that we're being proactive and not reactive, right? And so, because I have the same reaction, Dan, like, I'm really intrigued to keep running this story. The other thing that we just need to be aware of is that the local newspapers operating in a different way. Like a lot of the reporters aren't even physically going to meetings, they're watching whatever they can watch on the line stream and developing a story off of that. They're always bumping up against deadlines, so, you know, they'll do it. And what's not newsworthy to us, they might find newsworthy, and I think because there's this dynamic going on when we're on economic development, they're gonna keep eyes on all of us in print things. So I want us to be ahead of them in the way Tracy's thinking about it, so that he's getting the heads up and knows that we're, you know, we wanna speak with them, bring him a mayor, city manager about those things, so we can manage what happens to the degree that we can.
And that sounds like they were receptive.
Yeah, they are. We all probably need your forward. It's a very short staff, so I think the things that we can feed them. Anything else about the draft, so you understand the process? This is just for your review. Look at it a couple more times and feeling. We'll be running it through the audit committee. The audit committee will take a look at it, we'll formalize it, approve it, and then we'll send it to the state. Sound like a plan?
That's by July.
Yeah, by July.
I just got one comment
Yeah,
to
please.
add, regarding the article in the newspaper. I think your strategy is definitely the right approach to try to get ahead. I agree with you, Glenn, building that relationship, building that trust,
Yeah.
maybe can put an end to that situation over time as well.
Yeah.
Just to make sure, the article that does go out is the right article, because I know a lot of individuals, when they read the first initial statement that's out there, that's what they definitely believe in and whatnot. So I agree with you both to try to get ahead.
Yeah, Conceivable used to have a very good relationship, but I think in the past couple of years, we just kind of, that has been a little bit more frayed, because there hasn't been a specific point of contact, and so I think we just need to rebuild that a little bit, so.
And it's good for us, right?
There's a history.
I think it's good for us because we literally are doing a lot of really good things and doing, you know, reestablishing and rebuilding stuff. So when we have these opportunities to be engaged with the media in our own terms, it also is not only us responding to things they might have concern about, but it lets us tell our own stories. Like once I said to them, we were aware this having the minutes of chaos. It's like, yeah, I remember the key rate of our knowledge. I was like,
Yeah.
yeah, it's a lot going on about that, what's going on, so, right? So I just think, you know, I think every once in a while, sometimes I break down so we can break through. And we're just going, we just made the agreement that we take better control to the degree that we can of how we interact with the media by just being front end in things. But they're not showing up in the view. But good. All right,
The board will go at the.
yeah, on the job. We absolutely. So that's why I want you to take a look at it again, just to make sure that you're understanding what it says and what it is. The next thing is that Tracy, myself, and Karen attended the New York State Economic Development Council annual meeting. And we can kind of share the highlights of that experience. So Tracy, if you want to kind of set the time context about what the EDC is and why we were there and share some observations.
So this is the biggest conference of the year for the Economic Development Council. There's over 300 economic developers from across the state that converge on Cooperstown and take up all the hotel rooms and all the Airbnbs and all the spaces and bars. And there's a series of sessions, informational sessions. There was a panel on power, which was fantastical to hear about the power situation, but also there were sessions about brownfields and the cannabis industry in New York State and rural economic development, unique financing tools for rural economic development, kind of a whole litany of different topics. And you get exposure to folks from higher up in like New York State agencies or companies or site selectors that you might not normally get access to. So it's not unusual for them to have a panel of site selectors, which they didn't this time, but so it's just a really good place to get connections to people that you wouldn't normally get to meet. And so that's kind of, and then there's a lot of networking in this conference. You know, there's a lot of time dedicated to networking, so people can talk to each other and talk about what they're doing, make connections. So it's always really helpful. Because I'm always exhausted, but yeah.
Karen, do you want to share just a general reaction to your experience?
Yeah, it was very interesting. I especially was interested in the brownfields. There's 15 of them, so these are designated areas where the EPA is designated that is a brownfield. So in our area, like the Dunbar Carbon Fiber on Washington Street is considered a brownfield. A plastics company, manufacturing company at Nova Street is designated as a brownfield. And, but there was a particular group and they used 6 counties, which is so significant. And 6 counties all got together and had their own guidance as to what we can do in order to turn these brownfields into something else. So in one particular case, it used to be a gas station. So it said, well, geez, there's a steward's shop that wants to come in and it's a food cup and yeah, when we have the use. And while there was some pushback, and when they realized that the original site was a gas station and it would be part of the steward shop, it became like a draw. It was even steeper. It was no longer a brownfield because the use they wanted to use it for was one that had been used before. We just, and I know that in the past that Auburn has looked at brownfields, and I believe it was right before COVID, there was brownfield money being designated and they were put on an opening session for people, for possible investors. And I don't know whether or not that is something that's worth exploring. Because there's no
Sparks program. I think, the new city manager, spearheaded that when she was, head of planning, so I think she would be a good asset to see where we were then and what the plans are now.
research that's spinning, you know, background or what have you, as far as, but it looks as though they're going to be grants in order to establish and get certain ratings, certain soil testings or soil warnings, or what have you, to see what, because they've done phase 1, phase 2 at various locations. But then I don't know if that was the specific grant that was fulfilled, and then it's where it ended, or I don't know. Interesting to hear that there might be something there
Sounds like a hard education topic.
15 cents, you know, and I can't remember long.
Just because she
With
knows.
the
I know that it's right.
She's on the map, but we can.
So,
Jenny wasn't at the,
No.
but she would be able to answer your question.
yeah,
The all the other side.
right.
I also attended that session and I attended two others. And what I really was interested in, not was sort of a what the various communities were doing, but what were the attributes of how people were working together that made them successful. So a major takeaway for me from the brownfield session was that it occurred to me that I don't know if as a community we have an awareness that there are brownfields here. I'm talking about those of us in the economic development have shared understanding about it. And the way that they brought everybody together was to use a summit model to bring that piece of education and sort of test drive possibilities to see how people would react to the idea of really looking at brownfields and investing in them with the intent of flipping them into properties that people would want to develop. One of the people on the panel was in the housing industry and was talking about her company, which is about affordable housing, how they were interested in brownfields, and after everything was kind of tested and cleared, they were the ones that were making some of the investment. So one of the takeaways for me from that was how to use the summit format to bring people around an economic development issue, to find places of agreement, what places of disagreement could be, and not to do it necessarily for decision making, but for us, that we could serve as a convener around conversations that are relevant to us, things that impact us. The other session that I went to, I was interested in the cannabis session and how people were looking at that as an economic development opportunity, because I only went to sessions that were relevant to stuff that we were talking about, but because we have dispensaries coming into the community and into the county. And it occurred to me that I feel like, for me, the observation is that they come in and they set up a business, whereas in these communities, they really look at it as an economic development strategy. So they think of a cannabis producer or processor as just another manufacturing company. And then the city of Binghamton was there to talk about how they were able to obtain buy-in from people in the economic development ecosystem, right? But in the community at large. So they have retail spaces right now. And what's happening across the state, New York City is being much more progressive about that. They almost have like capital venture people that are investing in startups. And so there's very, very sophisticated ways. But I'm intrigued by that idea that the approach that they took to this was through the lens of economic development, bringing on a business that's manufacturing something in a very unique and interesting space. And I'm aware of this because Terrapin did come to us. I wanted to build out in the space, and I think people thought Cheech and Chong were coming. I mean, it's very young, smart business, but I felt like a problem after he made his presentation. So I think there's a lot of stigma around the industry, and I think part of what's happening to us is dispensaries are popping up, but we're not talking about it and onboarding new businesses. The other reason I went was because I was intrigued to see what IDAs were doing in that process. And in New York City, the IDAs provided incentives and allowed these companies to have access to the kinds of things we would provide to a company that's coming into our business.
So when you mentioned Terrapin,
Right.
and the state has changed quite a bit since
Right.
they showed interest in that property. Would it be worth it? And I know the mayor was really, and actually a lot of us were very much involved in
Right.
encouraging them to come. Just so you know, Terrapin was from Colorado, and they were into the manufacturing of cannabis. And so at that time, New York state law, really, it was hard to kind of edge your way in. Has it changed now so that, would it be worth reaching out to them?
Tracy and I can talk about. I think we need to be doing it though, Terry, simultaneously to take in the temperature of the community, because it could be very well be a great business thing, but we wanna kind of get a sense of what kind of resistance we could bump up against. Because I feel like the decisions just popping up, right? But people are talking about it, it is opening up. And then but in these communities, it's really a business strategy for them and a way to, they're looking at how much tax revenue the woman from the city of Binghamton talked about, that she, what, for a certain period of time, they generated $60,000, and she was able to reinvest that money to create a position. So what I was really observant about is that they created a mindset about cannabis companies and even retailers. They created a zone. They've done a lot of things that she just said, we just treat it like another business, but of course they did things along the way to educate the community and take the temperature about that. So we did talk about the possibility. But the one thing that people continue to talk about as a bit of an obstacle is that as much as New York State is open, the federal government still deals with cannabis as like a, what is it, a class 1 narcotic. Which makes me kind of gave off. But so that is the tension. The other thing that was interesting is that Tracy and I talked about maybe inviting some of them even for a board education piece for us. So the folks that do Beacon Skip, they're going to kick into cannabis business as well. They're doing cannabis infused beverages, right? So they really talked about how this 115-year apple orchard, this new generation of family members are moving it and so and moving it into a different direction. And what we thought that we really, that was, they served an infused beverage at the event. I said, people better know what the chips are. Because munchies are real for people that do that. But so I was really intrigued. So the other session that I went to was on tourism. And a lot of those folks were from downstate, but out of that, what really intrigued me was how tourism is really embedded inside economic development strategy versus as in addition to it. And one of the things that really piqued my interest is in Orange County, how they found space, they have their tourism office, also has a film office in it, and how they created sound stages. And then she talked about the gazillions of dollars that they're generating by also having a sound stage. Again, all of that was happening though is because the IDA, the local, I think, all of those entities were agreeing that this would be part of the strategy. So my takeaway from that was just the importance of when we're bringing people to the table, we can't leave tourism out. And one of the quotes that really stuck with me is that people need to think of tourism as the icing on the cake, and research is starting to show that tourism might be the cake, that people are choosing to come into communities to open businesses in great part because of the vibes, because there's cool places to live. So we've really been thinking about when Tracy's been talking to people like what's attracting them to Auburn, a lot of it's because it's kind of cool to live here. So I think that's a paradigm shift for us. The final thing that I would say is I was just observing a sort of what were the dynamics going on. So what I observed was happening in all of the projects that were successful is people agreed that they would work towards a common goal. So it was, were able to get the stakeholders. I also went on the session on business retention about how the folks in Plattsburgh for after the Air Force Base closed, got the bus company to come. And so they talked about there was no turfism, that they were willing to be creative, that they stopped telling themselves we couldn't do it and started to explore how could we do it. The chamber, the IDA, everybody was in the room at the same time. And I think that as we're finding our way through this moment, the attributes of the people around these projects, we want to be mindful of as well, because they basically built relationships that, and everybody agreed that they worked towards a common goal and that they would not be able to come out and talk about why they couldn't do it. They'd explore what would it take to do it. And IDAs played a major role in all of that. So Tracy and I are going to ingest some of this and then start to figure out how to infuse some of this into board education. We talked about when we feel ready, hosting summits around issues that are relevant to our work here would be really, really a good thing to do too. And I want to thank you all for supporting our attendance at the conference. And there's some coming up in June, and I'd love for some of you to go to some of those, because we all need to know what's going on in the wild, wild west of economic development. Banking update. You all feel free to ask questions. You have to be in service of the party. You get comfortable.
So our banking situation is just such that our operating account and our main savings account is in Generations Bank. Generations Bank is being acquired by a credit union. We cannot bank with a credit union because they are not FDIC insured, and there's language in the statute about FDIC insurance. credit unions do have their own form of insurance. It's very similar, it's just not named in the statute. So I would like, unless.
No, I mean, the credit union is, will think it really took off after AS statute was drafted.
Right.
So,
But I think CCIBA is in the same place too. Um, they're
Yeah.
working on it.
so it was sort of after the late sixties when the late statute was drafted, and yes, the credit union both time make you up,
Yes,
which shares their expenses, but it's not good enough for the statute.
yes, so we have to move our money. We have our pilot account, I did roll things over in the, I did roll over the amounts that we talked about last month for the CD. So we reestablished the CD at Shamong. The question really just comes down to where we want to, place the rest of our funds, our operating account. If we want to bring everything over to Shamong, or we want to keep, I have been told by bankers especially, that it's good to have two different banks so that when you're looking to shop around for rates, you at least have two you already have relationships with. But it's also easy to only have one. So, I have really good relationships with Lions. I've worked with them a lot before, and I've been finding that they are kind of up there with the rates recently.
Did the CD money get moved?
Yes, so the CD money is, I think we said 25,000 to stay in the CD, that's been over. The rest of it is sitting in national right now. Because we don't have any pilot movement right now, so it's not really hurting anything right there. So rather than move it into generations, to move it out of generations, I just kind of left it there. And then we'll move it into the new operating account, wherever that is.
So Tracy, is there anything we need to do? Or-
We just need to decide where we're gonna put our money and make a motion to do that. And make a motion of who the signers are, which would be the same as all of our other accounts, it's just the bank is gonna ask for that. So.
Right, so does the finance committee need to discern that, or are you making a recommendation to us that we move the money to Chicago? Did I miss something?
Or Lions.
Or Lions.
Like, do we want one or two?
You want two banks or one bank, basically, and then there's plenty of banks, so.
Or did the money that was in generations, was it was the CD?
No, Generations has a savings account and our operating checking account, there is no CD there.
Okay, so I was looking at the last month's minutes, so did that CD mature and it went over at Shalom?
The Shalom one, the $25,000 that we agreed to keep in the CD did get put into a new one, it did go into a new one. And the rest of the money from the CD dropped into our Shalom bank account, which is our pilot bank account.
Gotcha.
We don't have any pilot transactions right now, so it didn't seem like it would hurt to just leave it there and decide what we want to do.
Go ahead, Tessa.
I like the idea of one bank account but, so, like, if we went with Lions for a checking account and then using, I think that it's great that we have some funds available to put into CDs, because really, like, that's probably part of the finance committee is see where can we put our money that's gonna make the most money. So I feel like even my short time on this board, like, we've been reaching out to banks a lot and, so I agree with you, I think it would be easier to keep one main checking account with a savings account. But then also make sure that we, as we keep looking to see like what cash flow needs and looking what that pool of money is that we can keep reinvesting. And that's an easy conversation pretty regularly with the banks.
I will say that CCIB is getting a really good rate on money market from Cuba National Bank, which is not terribly convenient.
But what?
It's just that they don't have a branch.
Oh, so union.
Yeah, they're Union Springs, yes. So it would actually probably cost you more to have me going out there.
Yeah. We're not doing that.
But it's good to know, because if we have like a savings account, or, I mean, I don't know if it's just savings without checking, but right, once the CD renews, we can still do that.
So Tracy, is there a recommendation coming forward? What is everybody else saying that we would? Tess is presenting a scenario that we could consider. What's your reaction to that scenario?
Well, it sounds like that's still a two main scenario.
Right.
So if the CD is still good with Chemont, then just roll over the money from generations to what was, you had mentioned,
Shamanga Lions, I think we're the ones that.
I mean, Strong Lions, they're the ones who like, one of them generally has the best rate between two of them.
so you're fine with having them in one or?
No, I think using one for operating with the checking, and then you probably little CD, like how kind of similar to what we did with generations, but
Okay,
we'll still shop around for different
I think
rates.
the question is, do we have one bank that does all of our banking, like Shimon, that has our CD plus our checking and savings account, or do we want our checking and savings account with the bank? Right?
Yeah, that's a question. We want one big.
Does that matter?
Oh, you mean just throw it all at Shimon? Is that?
Yeah, that's a possibility, yeah. That's certainly a convenient possibility.
But then later we can decide
Yeah.
that we don't really want the CD with Shimon.
Yeah, we can
Yeah.
leave CD anywhere we want.
So
Yes.
I'm fine with whatever works for you, whoever is easiest to work with, makes the most sense.
So do you need a motion? Now, we need to add this.
Yeah, we need a motion so that I can open new accounts.
okay.
So
When is their transition happening for generation?
I think over the summer sometime, I don't know the exact date. I think it's technically in just
It's like next week.
no, not next week.
But we do want to get ahead
It
of it.
will take time.
Oh,
for
for sure.
transition. So
Yeah.
then need Bob's signatures.
I'll motion to open a checking account at Shimon, use that, and then just keep it open for, just keep looking for the rates. Never, I think rates would be for CD or any kind of investment.
I recommend opening, both an operating checking and probably a money market instead of a savings.
Yes.
And that way we have, some interest bearing that is liquid.
Okay, I'll second that.
Any other discussion? Got it, what we're doing for now? Great, then all those in favor?
I
Opposition? It passes. Thank you, folks.
no roll call.
Do we
No
do-
roll call.
Right.
Rob.
It's on the train station. Rob pulls it out. It's on. All right. First. Yeah, that's on the Tasmania motion. Done. So we are making progress on keeping an eye on the file. The next item on the agenda is unfinished business. At a previous meeting, we started talking about the need to do some work with our UTEP. To update that, and then after that, we'll have a property update. So Tracy did send the document out for everyone. Tracy, if you'd like to speak to it, maybe I'll pull it up so that you can see it, that'd be great. It is our uniform tax exemption policy. That's for them, yes, right? Yes, thank you, go ahead, Tracy.
Yeah, so every IPA has had a uniform tax exemption policy by state law. What this policy does is it defines what types of projects and under what circumstances the IPA is allowed to provide incentives or consider incentives. There's some boilerplate in here, there's some stuff that's prescribed by law. But there is a good amount of flexibility in terms of what our priorities are and how we assign incentives. Our current UTEP, basically, it's a 10/10 schedule, I believe. So any project that comes before us, it's a 10-year pilot unless they deviate. And we've found that almost all the projects deviate. So it's time to look at the UTEP, come up with some additional guidelines, and we also wanted to make sure that we were including housing and how we're gonna handle housing, because that is now what the APO and the OSC is looking at to make sure that IDAs are doing it properly.
Can you repeat that? The APO and
The Approving Office and OSC, the Office of the State.
so the housing is becoming more,
It's,
yeah, timely.
Yeah, because it's just happening more and more than it used to. Ada's been doing housing projects for decades. But it's happening more and more across the state, so there's just a keener eye on it right now. And I think especially since the governor has a housing priority, and I think there's a lot of conversations happening about how housing works and how, as a state, the state can help incentivize housing and the type of housing communities need. This hasn't really trickled down to any policy changes for IDAs, but it's always part of that conversation. There have been conversations about loosening regulations for IDAs and housing. It just hasn't actually come to new life. So basically the idea of opening up our UTEP and revising it is to just update the schedule, better define what our priorities are, incorporate housing, and just give it a little bit of a refresh. So basically it outlines the types of incentives that we offer, which are the real property tax incentives, the sales and use tax exemption for construction phase and equipment, and the mortgage reporting tax abatement for any financing. What I proposed here is 2 different pilot schedules for businesses or commercial projects, and then 2 different schedules for housing projects. Which is more or less what we talked about. The business projects, I kind of kept the 10/10, but added an enhanced schedule that provides more benefit up front and it extends it out to 13 years. So it adds a few years to the exemption and it adds a little more benefit up front, and defining specifically that the enhanced business projects, that enhanced schedule would be tied to adaptive reuse or vacant or underutilized buildings, historic rehabilitation or restoration, and brownfield remediation and development. So focusing on some of those things that we do see in Auburn, that tend to be projects that have additional costs associated with them. So it makes sense to provide additional incentive to offset those costs. So like adding a sprinkler to an unsprinklered building, that's a pretty big cost. So this helps to offset some of that cost that comes along with things like historic rehab. But we can add additional priorities here if we wanted to add priority industries. If there are other types of projects we wanted to be incentivized in an enhanced way. And then I did add the housing projects, which I incorporated our prior conversations about aligning with the city's property sale policy, or sale property policy, which means we're doing due diligence about the developer and the potential owner of the property prior to approving any incentives, making sure they don't have property tax issues, code issues, those types of things that perhaps we don't necessarily want to be incentivizing. So we've aligned with the city's land sale policy in that regard. We've indicated that for affordable housing projects, generally speaking, we want them to talk to the city first about real property tax so that those projects can be handled consistently. The city is currently doing affordable housing pilots with the Auburn Housing Authority and some other developers. So to the extent that we want those, so this is really to say we want those handled consistently. So talk to the city first and then we'll consider it, but we will do the sales and use tax and mortgage reporting tax. For non-affordable, non-regulated affordable, I have 2 schedules in here, a 15-year and an enhanced 20-year. With the enhancements being tied to the housing policy, the supplemental housing policy, which was a separate document. And then I left in the renewable energy projects, but I don't actually see data handling. So, but it's still in there. I just left it. And then the rest is pretty boilerplate. I'm not gonna lie, I did extend the recapture period, since we do have projects that go out or schedules that go out to 20 years. I did extend that out. And that's it. So this would basically, so where we have flexibility is setting our priorities in terms of who gets enhanced pilots. And the nice thing that I like, and I like to recommend to IDAs about setting pilot schedules, is it gives you, it takes the question out of it. Developers come in knowing what to expect. And what I wrote into the deviation section of the UTEP is, if you want to deviate, you have to prove to us that you need more incentive than we're offering. So that would require, how I have it written is that they would need to get a third-party verification of a test of reasonableness to make sure that they can show us that, okay, you really do need more incentive to make the project happen. And having that be the basis of the deviation, or having that be a consideration in a deviation. And it gives the board a lot more information about why you're deviating, and what level of incentive is appropriate. And so that's the other big change, is the deviation and requiring some form of a test of reasonableness.
So again, this was presented to us for our information only, we don't need to do anything. Any general reactions, had heard that stuff going on about Tracy's recommendations? Updates?
So this is where I'll turn to Rob, of like, okay, what is the process here, like, what's the next step?
The next step would be for everybody to review it and then the next meeting would. I copy.
Oh, we don't, do we need to do a public hearing? And notices, public notices,
I have to look that up.
yeah, I think we do have to open it up in by the taxing jurisdictions, and then do a public hearing.
Yeah, now that you say it, I think you're right.
Yeah.
You should be the lawyer.
You're not the lawyer to say that. I only know this because I'm going through this with like 3 other clients right now, so.
Yeah, when I get turned around, they're switching heads between. General municipal law and ways. Yeah. Sometimes.
Oh, that's true, maybe it doesn't have to.
Yeah, see, that's why I'm.
Huh,
Maybe
that's a
we'll
good
just
point.
do a column in the paper and check it off.
There you go. So we probably need to do a public hearing. We might not, because we're here, and we're in the public authorities law, not the municipal law.
That's where I.
Good point. Although part of me thinks maybe we should just do it anyway. We try to-
Yeah, it could not hurt.
I think we should always err on the side of transparency,
Yeah.
when we can make it happen.
So yeah, so theoretically, if we were doing what's like any other IPA, which we are not, we would notify the taxing jurisdictions that we're contemplating a UTEP update. We would hold a public hearing. I don't know if there's a comment period thereafter before we date, but so I think maybe it is worthwhile to schedule a public hearing. Our next meeting is at Prison City North. I don't necessarily want to do it there.
Yeah, maybe July.
So maybe schedule a public hearing for July. In the meantime, do some communication. We can continue to a little bit, pick at it a little bit, and aim to approve it in August.
Is that comfortable for everyone? So I think our first step is for everybody, now that Tracy's given us the context for it, for everybody just to take a look at it. If there's things, are intergenerational here, some of us have been here a while, some of us are new. So make sure that if you have questions, you need clarification, because when we vote on it, we want us to understand what we're voting on. And then Tracy, you'll sort of frame up what the moving through the public hearing phase would look like. I have a question about that. I just think we can think about the communication strategy. Councilman's right on top of that. But the other thing, for example, if the folks that we need to notify that this is happening are the taxing authorities, is it appropriate for us to be more formal in making sure that somebody from the authority attends the public hearing?
Yeah, that would be great.
I just think.
I do think it would be good to have the board present for that one.
Yeah,
To do that.
wait, are we talking about the same thing? I'm thinking about representatives from the taxing authority.
Oh,
Should we be, no, I think we.
intentionally
That's right.
inviting
Yeah, I just, there's things that could be haphazard, there's other things I'm not so sure we should be at.
I mean, the good thing about Ada is that we have representation
Mhm.
from each of the taxing authorities. So it's kind of, we do have somebody there, but obviously it's an informal invite.
But even inviting the comptroller, like intentionally inviting the comptroller,
Yeah,
intentionally inviting both the chair of the legislature
yeah.
and the Auburn legislature.
Yeah, I guess the person, but yeah.
Right. You get where I'm going, right?
Yeah.
So,
Yeah.
as long as we're on the page, this is a stretch.
We can make presentations.
Yes, well, exactly. But I just don't, I guess because there's so much flux, I don't think we should be haphazard about anything. And also, you have to tell me if you think I'm over functioning, because you can. But I'm thinking in this case, that this might be something we just want to make sure that anyone that we really want to know knows. And if it's minimally, we issue the invitation and they don't come, that's fine. But I don't want to assume that if we put out a public notice, they're going to come.
And also, it might, I mean, Rob might disagree, that isn't the ideal, a public hearing isn't the ideal place to like do education, but
Right.
also maybe it's worth inviting our housing developers and letting them know, like,
Yeah,
I was with Joe Bartolotta today and I was like, oh, right, I should probably tell you about this meeting. But, you know, like, either in that, for that event or a later meeting, maybe doing some intentional outreach to the development.
Yeah. There's a method to my madness all the time, primarily because of what's going on around us. That I think when we can be proactive in informing stakeholders about things, we want them to know that we should just formally invite them, and then if they opt not to come, that's fine. But no one can say like, no. But do you really need the public in this section?
I do.
I know you do. You are that bored. I'm happy to have you. I have other skills.
I gotta react to the housing thing. And we're getting, getting the NY45s from, a business who has tenants. I don't wanna say I wanna stay in our lane, but I do think that we're supposed to have job creation. And for me, that's a big tether. Go ahead, Terry.
well, I just want to say, I know what you're getting at. Here's the thing. Let's just kind of, because I think I'm looking at this from a different perspective. The NY45s raised the question of like, okay, is this creating jobs, right? So that's kind of coming from the OSC, but also at the same time, from the state, there is a push for IDAs to help with the housing. Am I correct? With
There's a push for housing.
housing in New York City, and developers are coming to IDAs for some to save on taxes. So my thought is that it doesn't necessarily, NY45s don't necessarily apply in this situation. And so therefore, these IDAs are in this weird position of behaving like something besides an IDA.
Well, let me read something from CEDA from March of 2024. Housing is a critical need, by Peter King. And so it goes through all of it. What I really want to zone in on is Auburn seeking funding for a study to understand housing needs across the county and collected data needed to plan for growth. It is an applicant. Yeah, we do not give a housing study, we do not give any insight on, that particular thing. The other thing that is very important to me is that if a balance can be reached with respect to municipal finances, it may also be beneficial to incentivize multifamily construction in general through the IDAs. We can't have, I don't think the taxpayers in general can support having a lot of property off the tax rolls. And when I see the number of properties that are off the tax rolls, it's staggering. And I didn't delve in to find out, like, how does that work as a formula? Money. Well, in our apartment buildings with 4+ units, for just under 3,000 units. Of course, that includes oil center, striker homes. There's 2 more Ford's towers. 3 family units, there's 474 of those. 2 family units, there's 2660. There's just over 6,000 units. For apartment buildings or apartments. You know. So I'm just trying to wrap my brain around the number of pilots there are, whether it's a home village, whether it's secondary towns, whether it's the manor house, of course, they're off their right now, but I just think we have got to be cognizant of even the taxes is never down to dollar payments that I'm paying. And what kind of it's what is that going to represent? What kind of monetary value is that going to be? Yes, the housing stock in Harvard is in some cases deplorable. And in other cases, hard to call.
Yeah.
But somehow there's gotta be, I just don't want to see something come into effect. To take away the economic development session of what we did last year. It's like if the train starts rolling too fast, you start getting that feeling in your stomach, like this might not be what we're gonna do. Who's got to raise their hand and say, oh, we got to pause this thing.
But is it moving too fast?
I don't think you will get.
So what I can say is that the regional housing study is in the process of being released. It was presented at the last NYSEDC meeting. It does get into some data at the county or at each county level. So that will provide us some insights. We'll still need, well, theoretically, we'll still need a more in-depth look, more strategy and specific areas within the county. But that is going to be a good starting point, and I think they actually went a lot deeper than we thought they were going to go. So that I think I'll have in my hands by our next meeting. So perhaps we can look at that at our next meeting, because if we're not talking about doing a public hearing until July anyway, we don't need to do anything tonight. So I can share that with you once I have it in my hands. I think it might be in my box actually. So I can take a look at that, and that would be the basis of data to get started. And then the county and the city are having conversations about a joint housing study. But I honestly, I think if our community, as someone who does housing studies across the state right now, it's the same thing everywhere. Seeing the same trends, the same kinds of issues. And a lot of it just relates to this conversation we had previously about how capital constraints have changed in terms of costs of building, but also how the market has shifted where, yeah, I keep doing this hand motion. There's affordable housing, and it used to be that market rate housing was right here next to it. And now the market rate is going this way, and there's this whole middle of housing that is really unaffordable to build. And all the communities are seeing it, because affordable housing has other grants and programs available to them. market rate is, depending on the community, still manageable and viable. But this middle piece is where communities are really struggling. And I think especially with regional development, I think if we wait a year, even if they started tomorrow, it's gonna be a year before they have a housing study. I think Auburn's behind. We're gonna follow.
Well, just so.
Yeah, so I think I can bring that housing study, the regional one, and see if that helps to provide some additional insights.
I guess when I see like scattered sites development,
You're
um,
talking about redeveloping neighborhoods, Karen.
right, yes, but I know what I do see with that is that it's usually the developer that doesn't have to pay the taxes. And the neighborhood looks good, I wanna say maybe 5 years, and then it reverts right back to where it was.
Don't you
And
love
I-
constraints to force me to keep it
And
nice?
you know what, that's what happens when you join the community. When you try to receive the cycles. So whether it's the easterly Fourth Street area. That they've been all renovated. Whether it's Orchard Street.
I don't think it's like, I mean, I don't think it's like as bad as it was prior. I still think they're still holding, they're holding. I think they're holding.
They're holding up, but, is you hear representatives from the neighborhood that attends the council meetings from time to time. They're never the good neighbors that they anticipate. That's all I'm saying. And so what I'm saying is, I just don't want, it takes an extra meeting, and it takes 2 meetings in one month.
Yeah, that's what I would suggest that Tracy bring that information, because I agree, like, there should, like, it would be very nice to see something. And I hear what you're saying with the, with those certain areas, I mean, but I would say there's so many variables that go into that, we didn't know where to go. Things where, but anyway, there's, I think that Tracy just, like, had mentioned when we were coming in time, maybe we just look at that and go a little bit deeper at that moment, once we have the data.
Well, there's a couple of things to just philosophically and legal purpose of quality, right? So Rod can keep us on pace about if there's like a hard deadline. I think we should gather all the information we need. I'm also hearing maybe a need for us to talk about like what is our philosophy behind it? And then just a reminder that having the policy, it becomes a filter that we can use. It doesn't force us to make a decision, but it is available to us should something come before us that's interesting. And again, the interesting challenge we're in is because we're looking at this through our lens. We have colleagues across the county also being impacted by housing. I think it's important for us to explore what we could do in the event that we want to do something and do that in a data supported way. So I think everything that's in the middle of the table is what we really need to swoop up on and ask Tracy to bring it up for us so that we can take a look at it, because all my take on the policy is that it provides some guidelines for us in the event that something intriguing comes our way that we might be interested in supporting. The other thing that I think we're just going to navigate our way through is that for a really long time, IDA did have a clearly defined lane. That whole conversation we had about should we do certain kinds of projects because they're not industry. And I think for a long time, industry was the manufacturing traditional way. Now we got, these people pulling up, and they're like, wait a minute, right? Because people are treating that. So one of the things that I want us to do is just be open to the changing kind of ways that the lane that the IDA can be in, because I feel that shifting housing in the way that we're talking about it. I don't remember there being a housing crisis, for example, to this degree. So I'm of course, Rob's here to keep us compliant. I just think we need to sort of look at what's going on. The only question we need to ask ourselves is, A, can the IDA be engaged legally per our authority rules and regulations? And if we want to, what is it going to look like when we do it? And I think this is a great way for us to test that out. And I think the other thing that comes from this, is then we'll start having philosophies about things that will also guide our decision making. So it seems, Tracy, if I'm hearing everybody correctly, that we're open, nobody's saying no, we're just open. And we want to make a data supported decision, that we want to understand the data, so we can have deeper understanding how this policy would be utilized should something come before us. I'm speaking in statements, but I'm checking in. Is that what I'm hearing? Is that good? Test that for you. All right, and again, I don't believe in quickness of quality, so I think that we need to take the time we need. Tracy can let us know what that deadline is. We know that it's something. Right, we're choosing to do a public hearing, right? So I think we take the time we need to get to a place where we can have some consensus. Fair.
I think that the board should get, let's say, consensus or at least, you know, like any of the, things that, I should see, answer before we go.
Oh, yeah, absolutely, that's what we're saying. Yeah, that's what we're saying. Because we have to be comfortable about taking whatever it is to the public, right? And so, yeah, that's what we'll do.
We don't do this until next July, that's what it is.
I'm one of those people that until everybody's reading in the room feels like it's the right thing to do. I think we need to do that work to get to that place. And I think there's a lot of interesting tension, right? Because this train is pulling up the station and we already have the issues. So we just primarily need to figure out what's the specific role our IDA can do, that we do, what can we do in alignment with all of the things that it regulate us. Right? And I just feeling like we're gonna need some openness about that because the lane that we were traditionally in is now doing this. Right? So,
Can I tell one story about jobs?
yes, you can.
So,
Please do, Tracy.
just for context, when Governor Cuomo started pushing solar development, pushing IDAs to get involved in solar development, IDAs started getting, like, they started being like, but there's no jobs. But they started doing it anyway, and within 3 years, I think it was, they created a whole new category in reporting so that not having jobs associated with those projects wasn't dinging IDAs on that for job creation. Because it was a priority of the governor, and they made the adjustment to make sure that IDAs could do what the state wanted.
It's great to know.
So I'll just say that if this continues to be a priority for the governor, they will adjust. And, you know, I think that at the end of the day, regardless, we need to do what's right for our community within our legal statute. And if they decide that we're doing the wrong thing, we'll cross that bridge. But to our, you know, as long as we're acting in a legal way, and if we decide we need to be doing something else that fits within the statute, let's do it. Like whether it's housing or anything else, if we want to put a package together for film and a soundstage, great, let's do that.
I guess when you're saying work, it's so. I think in terms of how many rounds of the TX roles and how the city continue to have the budget that we have to get funds. Yeah, there's gotta be the opinions.
And I think another conversation we really need to have, maybe to never circle back to this, is like being off the tax rolls in a pilot doesn't necessarily mean loss of tax revenue. In most cases, it means more tax revenue. It's just not as much as they could be getting if not for the pilot. So I think we need to keep in perspective as well that if there's underutilized property that's generating $5,000 a year in tax revenue, and then the housing developer comes in and builds a great mixed income multi-family housing, their assessment would go up to $5 million. In the pilot, they're not paying them $5 million, but they're paying more than $5,000. So it's still a big gain. And we also have that hook for 15 to 20 years to say that property in good shape, or we're getting your benefits.
And there's also, I mean, that's it, but there's also, you know, trying to, you know, coming from the perspective of, been on council for 12 years, you know, I've seen the ebb and flow of neighborhoods, and it's not as like concrete as like this neighborhood, this. There are just pockets of things, there are pockets of progress and pockets of, you know, blight. But I will say overall, I think I've got to say, advice, Auburn's managed to try to lift the various neighborhoods. And I do think some of the things we've done on ADA have helped, and some of the things we've done in the city itself. But as mayors and all, we got a lot more to do. But you're right, we're thoughtful on how we do it. And, you know, are there some things I voted on in here that were on the floor, if I regret? I'll be honest, yeah. But I will say that, you know, I think some of the projects we voted on here really elevated the city and have helped that. And it has taken me a long time to realize, you know, the value of you know, housing projects, some housing projects. So I'm open, but I think we should take it slowly, for sure, for sure.
Yeah, it's just, did you say mixed use?
There's mixed use, there's mixed income.
Right, okay, but,
I love mixed income.
yeah, but mixed income is usually because of the state and federal grants about, so they go in the city directly with the private.
I'm not even talking about it in a regulated way. So it could be a project that has some market rate and some workforce housing, not regulated affordable housing. I don't use that term regulated as a regulated term. I use it more as a, how are we providing housing transitions to people in the community? If someone gets a better job, gets promoted, they want to move into a better apartment, is there an apartment for them to move into? If someone is going out on their own for the first time, is there a good entry level apartment for them that they can afford? And then after that entry level apartment, is there another apartment for them? You know, so I'm thinking more about just the natural housing transition that people go through in their life. As opposed to kind of a regulated mixed income, like the 9% tax credit or something like that.
So for the purpose of just time, I'd like us to, just leave this conversation where it is. We don't have to leave it Tuesday. I think there's some new ideas, maybe even some other information we need to have. And the only sort of bow that I would put on this is that I also think when I'm observing in economic development conversation, also people more and more making the connection around other contributing factors in what's happening in neighborhoods and communities. So as poverty is happening everywhere, poverty is happening here, and just so that we have a full understanding, and remember, our role is to figure out the role we would or could play as housing continues to move forward here. And then what is our philosophy behind it? And I think the insertion or the update of the housing section of our overall policy provides us with some guidelines and ways to manage. So we just have to continue to remind ourselves, and let's just leave this in the middle of the table, and we will agree that we won't do any quickness or quality. There's nothing pressing us to decide this in the next month. And when we decide to do a public hearing, we all have to open that up in a way being in agreement about what it is we're going to ask them to react. Yep. So
I'm saying it's a good time to take my passion as pressure.
not at all.
I do this like, I've been doing a lot of this lately and I get riled up.
Yeah.
I'm not trying to like force you in anything or push anything on you. I just, like for instance, that's just kind of just because I'm completely out of their UTEP and I'm so it's fine.
And again, I think that, you know, what's happening to us too is we're all working in isolation of each other. And I'm saying that the hallmark of these really successful projects was because everybody was at the table. So we're establishing a point of view outside of what's going on around us, right? So I think the more we can be clear about how we would play, if the opportunity to play happens, just expedites our capacity to be a better stakeholder, a better partner, should people decide to bring this into the center And then, of course, we have the city council here who's dealing with this in another way. So remember, this is just all of us really framing our philosophy and making sure we put some infrastructure around our ideas in the form of policy, so that should something come our way, we're clear about what we would do and how. So let's just keep exploring it. But I think that you're being remiss if we don't think about the role an IDA could play in housing such a centerpiece of what's happening. The board education piece, and I think this won't take a long time. Okay, we can skip it. But we do want to talk about, and Tracy, you want to bring this back, because I do think it's important for us to understand the APO guidance, the FOIL, how that relates to what we do and know about. Okay, so we'll make sure we bring that back, because this was about. No, that everything we say. And is for public consumption.
Oh, I'm not going to be fine.
Yeah, agree with this. Chair, Tessa, anything with the treasurer's report?
I just wanted to quickly go over the balance sheet. So, mostly because I think, you probably noticed that with fluctuation with cash. I just wanted to point out that in the prior year, there was about $150,000 of that extra pilot revenue that, of course, isn't in now. So it wasn't that we lose all of that money, just to think that. So, and again, kind of bringing some more just attention down to that net income line. So we scroll all the way down to that second page of the balance sheet where you have the total equity. You see the negative 36,000 comparing to from last year. And we'd like to see that trend in a more positive number, but I think the nature of this organization is, we're paying the leases at each month. But then you get that like project and you have the engine. So that's just what that looks like, but just also mindful that, that which you can confirm them. And then I was just gonna note that our funding is July 2nd. That we might have to request that we change that. So we might have, I might request to push that.
And then I'm also seeing that we have some bills. Tracy?
Yes, so if anybody has the printout of the bills page, can you just pass it to Tessa? I think I passed it around with the agendas, but anyways,
Right there.
we have two things going on. GoDaddy was the renewal of our Auburn ID domain renewal. That happened automatically, so that's actually already been paid. Approving it. And then just a bill for MRB group for services in March.
I'll second it.
So we'll also accept the treasurer's report when we're in.
Good.
There was nothing Robert's rules, not going backwards. Right, so the motion is the motion on it. Okay, it goes out. There's a motion on the floor that we approve the payment of the bill. Can I get a second? Okay, any more discussion about that? If not, question all those in favor? Position, extension, set aside. All right, and then I will need a motion to accept the treasurer's report as presented. Second. Oh, that's Gordon. All right, and then motion to the second, that we approve the treasurer's report. All those in favor? Opposed? Great. Does any, do we need to want an executive session or anything today?
No, but I did want to give the property update.
Oh, please do.
I'm sorry, I think I sent an email out about it, but, the deal for those residential properties did fall through, so they are back on the market.
And I'm really sorry, can I go back to the corrective action plan? Because I came in a little bit late. So at this point, and thank you, Tracy, for bringing that down to layman's terms. Unfortunately, it was a little bit long, but, do we have to approve, like, what's the next step for
that. So, we're gonna schedule an audit committee meeting. Okay. Have the audit committee dig in, make any additional updates, and then in the next board meeting, we'll bring the updated draft for approval to be submitted. And then so after the June meeting, it'll hopefully get approved, and then I'll submit it right after, it's the end of July, so July 24th or 25th. So we do have some time if we decide we do want to look at it again in July. We'll have another meeting beforehand, but I think generally speaking, the path will be maybe approval at the meeting.
Yeah, what you need that. Just a quick thing for me is that you all read in the paper that the county is proposing or taking a look at bringing up a one-stop economic development entity, that at the first glance that entity did not include ADA. The mayor, myself, Tracy and Jenny, I thought I wanted to intriguing, are talking with the county chair, and I just offered to the mayor for consideration that as that's unfolding, at some point, if they deem it appropriate, that we may want to invite the county chair and the county legislator who's pushing that idea forward into a meeting to us to talk about why ADA was not originally proposed to be part of the economic development one-stop entity. It's counterintuitive to all current best practice. We just need to understand what their thinking is. So I know the mayor's been talking to them. Jenny, who is our Rising City Manager, has been talking to them. Tracy sits in one of the entities on the board, one of the entities that would be included in the one-stop. But I want to get a handle on this so that if the intention is to pull that train out of the station without ADA on it, I think that creates an opportunity for us to think about that. How do we need to position ourselves for the businesses inside the city that we support? So just stay tuned for that. If anything pops in the paper, I'll kind of let you know that is something we just need to have things in place. Okay? Anything else?
Tracy, I do have one more update. So today I actually went on a field trip. A group of us went out to Syracuse and met with County Executive Brian McMahon, to talk about just like Micron and regional stuff, and just, this meeting was actually set up by Joe Bartolotta. So it was Joe, myself, Michael Miller, Jonathan Anna, Elaine Daly, Jennings, there's Joe. So there were a whole bunch of us there just to more or less put a face to the name right now. Because he did indicate that he's working very closely with Madison County and Oswego County leadership. And I think there's just, there's a desire to put a face to the names in Cuyahoga County and make sure that he's aware of what we have to bring to the table, in terms of infrastructure insights, but also how we can collaborate with Johnson County on a number of issues around infrastructure and business development to support regional growth. So it was a good meeting. We're going to send him some information about some of our sites. But I think really the intention is just to open, and that was more to open the dialogue and make sure that we're in communication. And we're part of those conversations more on his mind, because he really is driving the train in a lot of ways. So I think that served that purpose, and I think that we're in a better place today than we were yesterday.
Any comments about that? You're ready to go home? You're tired. All right. Move to adjourn.
I'll do that.
All right, all those in favor? Prison City, next one. Prison City North.